ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to follow this potential Alberta secession that may or may not happen, it has to be kickstarted with a referendum, which we're hearing now is about 60% signed in terms of the amount of signatures that are needed. Remember, the Premier of Alberta lowered the amount of signatures required to trigger a referendum by about 75%. And now you're also talking about Saskatchewan, maybe in a domino type effect, joining the United States or at least seceding from Canada. We're also going to talk about some of the legal stuff with all these things that Alberta and stipulation they have to go through in terms of them leaving. Is that really necessary when it comes to someone like Donald Trump being in office? I'll talk about what I mean in a second in terms of that. We're also going to talk about the polls, especially with younger people within Canada and within Alberta being more likely to want to join the United States. And that's the dynamic we're wondering about. Are a lot of these conservatives in Alberta more enthralled with the idea of becoming just an independent country that has a military alliance or agreement with the United States to where the US would protect them, but they would be independent? Or would they join the United States originally as a territory and then eventually be grandfathered in as a state within a few years? You've got young Canadians flooding into Alberta. Alberta's getting younger, and it's getting a lot more conservative, as we've seen. As you can see, the Alberta Prosperity Project reports over 113,000 registrations for the citizen-initiated referendum on separation. That's 63% of the signatures required. There was another signature that was going around that said, oh, they already hit the number, but that was from 2019. I believe this is the legitimate one, so it's at 113, and it would be only 10% of the amount of people that voted in Alberta. And so you would figure that the number to hit would be, which is like 160K or 167K, whatever it is, it's going to be very easy. And after that, you would figure if they have a referendum, the questioning of the referendum, the way the words are laid out in it will be very interesting in terms of, is it just more autonomy? Is it full secession? Is it maybe a leverage play to try and get a better deal within the Canadian government when it comes to the amount of money that Alberta has to give up, when it comes to their natural resources and the rights to them with the carbon tax? There's a number of things they might go for, but if they are serious about seceding, you can see this. There's all this no BS, no spin. All Canadians should read this. Look at this map. So you've got also Saskatchewan there, and obviously Alberta, with the rest of Canada staying Canada. But you've got all this stuff. The House of Commons, they've got to do all this. It goes to 15 different jurisdictions. It talks to all the provinces, everything like this. This is the way I see this when it comes to all of this. If Alberta wants to leave and they get the signatures to have the referendum, and they have a referendum, and let's just say for the sake of the argument, it's 60-40, so it's a clear majority. It's not a simple majority. It's not 51-49. It's 60-40. And so the question then would be, would it be for them to be independent or join the United States? But either way, if you're Donald Trump and you say, I respect that and I recognize Alberta as an independent country with the ability to join the United States, now them being an independent country, that has its own problems in terms of you're going to have to work some things out to be able to sustain everything, but that can be done, you would figure, especially considering the amount of natural resources Alberta has. So if Trump recognizes that all of this stuff, you're relying on all of this different, within their constitution. If Trump recognizes Alberta, if the citizens of Alberta say, we want to be independent, we have a referendum, it's all legal, it's all done, and Trump says, we recognize it, what can the Canadian government really do? Is the Canadian government going to go to war with the United States over Alberta? It's just like the idea, is NATO countries in Europe going to go to war with the United States over Greenland? But this would be even worse, because this would be, the people of Greenland really don't want to join the United States, at least not right now. This would be them in a referendum saying, we want to be independent. And it might only just even be just Trump recognizing them as independent, not even saying they're going to join the United States. Now, that would be an option that could be open. I don't know where Trump would be at in terms of supporting this if they would just be independent to where they make an economic deal with the United States. They could not even require much military protection because of their location. It's why Canada barely has a military. Also, their population is extremely small when you compare it to the size of land that Canada is. But you look at all this stuff, to me, there's a wild card in terms of Donald Trump when it comes to all of this. It's international law. It's all this different things. in terms of their constitution that makes it extremely hard for secession to go through when you're talking about negotiations with the Canadian government. If they really want to do this, it is complicated because we don't know where their people feel about whether they want to be independent and just do a deal with the United States or whether they want to join the United States. The verbiage of the question on the referendum will be very interesting. And you can just see pretty much all of the seats in Alberta going conservative. That's 32. So 37 total seats, 34 going to the Conservative Party. Liberals getting just 2. But even British Columbia, a lot of the rural areas, all of Vancouver's liberal, but very similar to like Washington State, Oregon, all the rural areas in Oregon, all the rural areas in Washington State are conservative. Same thing in British Columbia. And then you also have Saskatchewan, which is very conservative. 14 total seats, 13 going conservative. That's not to say, well, all these people would vote conservative in a U.S. election, and that would be way down the line because they would be added as territories, we would guess, and then become states within 4 or 5 years. But it would be a longer process anyways, outside of something crazy. I mean, to me, Trump is the wild card if he really wants to push this because of our dynamic in terms of, and again, this whole thing, it's like the liberals do the pearl clutching with Greenland and say, you can't just do that. But with Alberta, if they've got all these stipulations and all these laws to try and prevent it from happening, Canada would have all these laws to prevent Alberta from leaving. Why doesn't Trump just say, if it's like 60-40, they want to leave? Trump should say, I recognize it. They want to leave. They're tired. That's the citizens voting to leave. It's not like, oh, yeah, I'm this big bad person trying to take over a territory. No, their own citizens voted they wanted to leave. So that's it's not even a loophole. It's just, that is what it is in terms of trying to maybe fast track this and get them to join the United States. I don't know if they want to join the United States. You can see this, 4 in 10 Canadians aged 18 to 34 would vote to be an American if citizenship and conversion of assets to USD is guaranteed. And that's another thing when it comes to this deal. You know, we talk about negotiating with Greenland and giving Greenlanders money like $10,000, $20,000 along with infrastructure upgrades. Well, Trump has also approached Canadians, and this is just Canada as a whole, which we don't want to happen. They're too liberal. It would not be good for U.S. elections when it comes to Republicans. But it's like, well, you could get a 1-to-1 exchange rate, Canadian dollar for USD. That's something that would be very attractive for the people of Alberta. So there can also be things that are done if they do want to be independent to say, join the United States, your taxes are going to be lower. You're going to be able to, if they were independent, they could have their own setup, but still, you're talking about military protection, although it may not interest them all that much, again, because of their location. The point is that the younger people seemingly, when it comes to the polls, I think it's probably around 30% before this election, maybe 35, wanted to become independent. And now maybe it's 50, maybe it's 55, maybe it's only 45. I don't know. That's why there should be a referendum to see. And that's why they're creating this. They're making it really easy for there to be a referendum. And I'm not saying it's going to happen. A lot of Canadians, even in Alberta, say, no, we don't want it. But they're growing very tired of the situation. You've got this globalist Mark Carney who comes out of nowhere, gets like 150K votes to even be a candidate. He's a candidate for like 3 weeks, does 2 rallies, and then wins. And you've got Trump like bragging about it, saying, I'm going to love negotiating with him. They're just tired of it. And they're tired of just the ridiculous liberalism, the globalism within Canada. And it's understandable. But this is when the momentum is going to be the highest, so they really need to capture this and have this referendum relatively quickly. That's what I would say. So we'll have to see what happens in terms of, and then another thing is we'll have to see with Saskatchewan, because Saskatchewan, it's been thought they would follow as kind of a domino effect Alberta if Alberta does end up seceding. But you're talking about all this, there's all this legal stuff, and if they have a referendum and it's 60-40, Trump should recognize them as independent, and then they're independent. And it's like, well, there's all these laws within their government, things like that, and you've got to have all these negotiations and stuff. Well, if we recognize them as independent and Trump says they need to be independent, we are the ultimate rulers of North America because of our military. They should be independent. Now, it could get a little bit complicated because Canada and their government, Ottawa is not going to want to lose Alberta because of how important the province is in terms of the amount of money it generates through the resources that they have. And Trump, I'm sure, loves the resources. He'd be very interested in adding Alberta as a state. But that's where it becomes, does Trump just want Alberta as a state? Do the people of Alberta want to do that, or do they just want to be independent? Would Trump also endorse them just being independent? Maybe it would set up a better relationship with Alberta directly in terms of our trade with them, to where they could be unshackled from all the carbon tax and the regulations that are put on them from Ottawa. That's something that could also happen as well. So there's a lot to take in. And I think if they want to do this fully legally, I'm not sure it can really be done, because I believe when it comes to their constitution, it requires all of the provinces in agreement to vote for it. Now, yes, if it's like 65 or 70% that want to leave, you would figure the provinces, the government of all the other provinces would say, all right, they can go. So maybe that ends up happening. But there's a ton that has to happen, to where maybe there's multiple referendums. There would be negotiations directly with Ottawa when it comes to Alberta leaving. And you're talking about like a multi-year thing, which I think it's going to be a multi-year thing either way. You're talking about secession of a province. But you're talking about like a decade thing if they go through all this stuff. So you have to wonder with the Trump component, where if there was a liberal in office, none of this they would be extremely soft. They would agree with Carney, like Kamala Harris or whoever. But with Trump, it's different, because he's a lot more aggressive, and he could be emboldened by the idea that the citizens of the specific province want this to happen. It's not like Greenland, where, oh, they're against it, even though that's like a psyop and there's 57,000 people, it doesn't even matter. But still, if the people of Alberta want it to happen, that's going to embolden Trump to say, hey, you know what? You need to allow this, because this is what they want. They're voting for it. The people are voting for it. And then that makes the Canadian government look bad if that ends up happening. Now, I don't know if they will end up voting for it. If it's like 50-50, it's not going to happen. That's the big component. The big component is the people of Alberta wanting this to happen. And I'm not sure that. Now, if it was like 50-50 in terms of the opinion polls before the election, I'd say, yeah, it's probably going to at least be 60 or 65, because they're so angry. There's an immediate reaction and there's momentum, and there's a demoralization to another liberal government after what they just saw with Trudeau having to step down with the 16% approval rating. You put in some globalist banker, he has 2 rallies, he can barely talk, and he wins in a month. They call the election, they say Donald Trump's big, bad, and ugly. And, so it's like they're demoralized right now. But I don't know if there is the support in Alberta for this to happen, because from the polls that I've seen, it's like, well, 30% want to leave. Now, I'm sure that number's gone up because, again, there's momentum for it and the demoralization of Carney winning. But has it gone up to 55, 60, 65%? I don't know. But it's going to be, a referendum would be interesting either way, just to see where they're at. I would probably say it's 45, 40, which obviously would not be enough. Now maybe it'll be more, and maybe if there is direct negotiations with Trump in terms of giving them a one-for-one exchange rate, the idea of less taxes, joining the United States, having our military protection, you're talking about being able to get more for your resources by joining the United States, deregulating. That's when the negotiations start happening. That's why I said we should negotiate with Greenland. Those people don't like us. They don't know what we can give them relative to what Denmark is giving them. You negotiate directly with Alberta. So that may be something that could entice Albertans to potentially want to vote for the referendum. But this would have to happen before the referendum. If they have the referendum and it's like 45, 50%, I don't see it, because even a simple majority, if you look at the Clarity Act, you need more than that. Now, it's very vague in terms of how much you need, but if you get to like 55, 60%, then maybe that triggers another referendum. So we'll have to see in terms of all of this. Guys, make sure you like this video down below. That's going to do it for this one. Also, follow me on X. Link to that's in the description.